Circuit board parts layout. First time you build something where you're soldering parts to a circuit board, it can be a little confusing about how things are going to go. So I'm going to attempt to go over some of these things. This right here is just a pictorial description of our parts layout for our circuit board. And here I show all these different parts and their corresponding numbers. So I can see that here I've got, let's say, C1, and that's a 22 microfarad electrolytic capacitor. There it is right there, and there it is right there. Now, you'll notice that it shows specifically an orientation. In other words, positive and negative. Okay, this is known as polarity. I have to have the positive and the negative placed properly. So now I'm going to compare my capacitor to the picture. And in an electrolytic capacitor like this, if you can see that white stripe on the blue background, that white stripe indicates negative. So when I place this, I'll make sure that the white stripe is pointing towards R3. Well, what's R3? R3 is a resistor. This is a resistor. And in this case, this resistor is a 330 ohm resistor. That is pretty straightforward, but you have to understand, all right, how to decode a resistor to know if this is a 330 ohm resistor or this is a 330 ohm resistor. Now in this case, the orange-brown is my 330 ohm resistor, and the red that I just showed you is this 2.2 kiloohm resistor. So you don't want to mix your resistors up, because if you put them in the wrong place, the board won't function. Here, as I go down, I show a trimmer potentiometer. And that's this guy right here. 3 wires. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, because there's only 3 wires or 3 terminals, it can only be put on the board in one place in one location. This is a microchip. This is a timer, all right, and it's a 555 timer, and I notice that there's a notch on there. Well, if I compare the notch on the timer to the notch on the picture, that means that I want to make certain that when I install this timer, I have that notch pointing towards the capacitor. However, I do not want to solder these wires in. Instead, I'm going to use this. This is a socket for that timer, and that's what I'm actually going to install on the board. I'll solder the socket, not the chip, because soldering the chip can damage it. We do not want to put too much heat into it. So at any rate, we kind of look at that parts list, and then we start locating things. I've already started to assemble this, and so my LEDs, which are L1, L2, and L3, are assembled to the top. And when I look at my LEDs, and I look at the picture here in the parts layout, I see that I've got this dark band on the bottom of my LEDs as they're laid out here. That's the more negative side of my LED, and so that means I want the more negative sign to point down. Now, to verify that I've got the more negative side of an LED in position, I'm going to do something where I'm going to look at the LED itself. It's going to have a flat side on it, and that flat side is negative. Or if I'm looking at the LED wires, it's going to have one long wire and one short wire, and the short wire is the negative. So I have to make sure that these get oriented properly. Resistors, it doesn't matter. They can go in either direction. Polarity on a capacitor, we already talked about that. Okay, so I install my capacitor, push it through like that, and that's with the white stripe pointing up, and that matches my picture. Okay, white is negative. All right. I put my IC socket into place, like that. Wires are sticking through, okay? IC sockets can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll take that and then just lightly with my finger fold that over, okay? And I'll do that with all of those, just like that. That'll help me to hold that in place, and it'll also make the soldering a little bit easier, okay? Here, my potentiometer. There's the holes for it, and like I said earlier, no big deal, right? There's only one way that potentiometer can go through there. Occasionally you'll run into where you have a potentiometer or another component that the wires won't actually go through the board. In that case, it's not a bad idea to keep a small drill bit around and by hand open up the hole in the board. Remember, if I don't place my components properly, I'm going to have problems. So my other LED, or excuse me, my other resistor, R2, is 2.2 kiloohm. This is my 330 ohm. Here's my 2.2 kiloohm. And there is a video on how to tell the difference between the two. R2 goes here. Now I get a little goofy when I start assembling things, and I like to have stuff pretty well oriented so that everything to me lays out nice and it's pretty and it looks good, and it's also fast for me to identify. So when I put my resistors in place, okay, you'll see I have this gold band here and here. That's oriented for me to the right. That way I don't know. I don't really need to do that. It doesn't matter. I could certainly put it in like this, but I just happen to like having that gold band pointing towards the right. So that's kind of how you would go about installing your parts on your board so that you can solder them into position. Once I've got everything soldered in, the last thing I'll put in would be my socket for my 9-volt. I'll solder that in, and they very clearly show the positive and the negative, the red and the black. I'll put a battery in it, and everything will work.